Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before.
Again, for the sake of Anna, who's probably not as familiar with the series as everybody else, and I don't know how familiar the rest of you are, I just want to start out with a little bit of an introduction to just exactly what is this Star Trek series. And it's a television series that started on CBS in 1966 with an initial storyline that was developed by Gene Roddenberry, and it was about the Starship Enterprise that was on, as it said, a 5-year mission to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man had gone before. And then that was followed by a whooshing sound. The original series was a 3 seasons long. It produced 79 episodes. It was canceled at the end of the, after 3 seasons on air. And oh my God, what an unbelievably bad business decision that turned out to be. The series itself went on to become one of the most popular and successful, both entertainment-wise and financially wise, and prolific entertainment series ever produced. Throughout its entire 50-year history, the various series have explored an unimaginable number of different ideas and themes. They've explored interracial, interspecies conflict and cooperation. It's explored the concepts of war and peace, galactic federations, galactic confederations, galactic empires, corporeal species, non-corporeal species and beings. The list just goes on and on and on as to the various themes and subjects that it's depicted and covered. The societies that have been depicted in the series cover a huge spectrum of how both human and non-human species develop and interact, and what values they ultimately adopt or have adopted. Now, before I go on, I want to geek out a little bit here. Total number of TV broadcast series that have been produced so far is 10, and that's got roughly 38 seasons and counting. Total number of actually broadcast episodes, although this is changing. The last set of figures I got was 798 separate episodes. And that roughly turns out to, if you figure on an average episode length of 47 minutes, about 78 8-hour days of binge watching. So just in case you want to try that, good luck. It also has produced 13 full-length movies, and they covered both the original series in 2 different timelines and the next generation. There's also a developing number of solely web-based series. There's 4 at least that I know of now, and there appears to be more in production now also. The series itself covers roughly 2.5 to 3 centuries, and I did exclude in that number the propensity to vault backward and forward through time that episodes occasionally do during the series. And of course, the series itself spans all 4 quadrants of the Milky Way galaxy. So it does cover a huge objective territory. It includes planets, star systems, species, societies, and civilizations that do encompass the entire Milky Way galaxy. And those various societies and species span at least tens of millions of years. The series itself tends to classify physical peoples and society as either free, faster than light travel capable, or faster than light travel capable. Um, it also tends to broadly divide beings into either physical or transverse physical or non-corporeal in nature. Um, the series itself does acknowledge that societies evolve, but as long as you do have all kinds of species flying around at faster than light speeds, bumping into other species that are not as technologically advanced as the faster than light folks are, um, the faster than light folks could always stumble in and totally screw up the slower than light societies. Um, you also have depicted civilizations that regressed after advanced and became non-corporeal, um, advanced and went extinct for all manner of reasons. So there's just a huge objective territory that's covered. But in a sense, the objective territory was probably the least of my problems when trying to figure out how to do this presentation in something close to a half hour. There was also a huge number of, I call them subjective challenges. And it kind of stems from the fact that just how does one overlay an entertainment series that's designed to encompass multiple worlds, multiple species, multiple cultures, and that potentially can span um, thousands, if not millions of years. And you have to overlay that with a cultural development model, spiral dynamics, that encompasses one world, one species, and spans roughly 100,000 years. That's a bit of a challenge. To just give a couple of illustrations of the challenges that are presented, um, as I looked into this, began to ask questions like, does an assimilated Borg really have an upper left quadrant to explore?
Resistance is futile.
Does a Horta society truly demonstrate any kind of complex lower quadrants? And kind of the most puzzling one, at just exactly what developmental stage is a peace-loving transphysical being posing as a human who, in a fit of rage, totally wiped out an entire civilization of 50 billion inhabitants because they killed his human wife. It just kind of made my brain explode, uh, considering all the various ramifications of the questions that are that arise in the series. Now, fortunately, the series has given us 55 years to chew over these issues.
Resistance is futile.
So I did apply some ground rules as I tried to narrow this thing down. I did start with the baseline series assumption that societies themselves are divided between pre-warp speed, um, which would developmentally take us up to basically the modern era, and post-warp speed, and then I went from there. And when I was looking at just the pre-warp society, I did just consider those or look at those that had naturally evolved on a given planet or moon. And I deliberately excluded the myriad transplanted from societies that are also depicted in the series. Um, so, I kind of wrestled with the idea of how do I recognize that any society that can achieve space flight, let alone faster than light travel technology, has probably achieved at the very minimum a spiral dynamics developmental stage of orange, possibly even yellow. so I then assumed that if these societies that possessed faster than light speed technology were at least developmentally orange, I then circled back and looked at what were the characteristics or the primary characteristics that were depicted in the society in the series, and then what place on the spiral dynamic stage of development were they? for example, Klingons, which I characterized as red purple, or Vulcans, which I characterized as blue or orange blue. And kind of at the core of it, again, recognizing this series has been going on for 50 years and it's growing rapidly. It's way, way too big to cover it all. So I didn't even try. Now, this does kind of open up the possibilities for any further ones in the future that we want to dive deeper into. Would certainly be ripe for presentations. So now this is, because this is not a fully serious presentation, I figured we better have a couple of trivia breaks. So the first question is, where are James Doones or Scotty's ashes buried? Does anybody know?
Probably somewhere morbid associated with where the set is built. That's my guess.
Anybody else?
Is he Scottish? For real?
He is.
Maybe Scotland?
No, I don't believe so.
I'm gonna
Well,
get,
maybe with the name of Doohan could be.
I'm gonna guess somewhere in space.
Give Tad a cookie. He is in his ashes are in space, orbiting around the Earth.
Wow,
The
incredible.
Star Trek Enterprise engineer has traveled nearly 1.7 billion miles through space, orbiting Earth more than 70,000 times after his ashes were secretly smuggled aboard and hidden on the International Space Station. Richard Garrett, an entrepreneur and one of the first private citizens in space, says he smuggled James Doohan's ashes onto the International Space Station in 2008. And that was done during a 12-day mission that he served as a private astronaut. And he did it as part of a plot that was concocted by Chris Doohan to fulfill his father's dying wish. So back to work. So then I dove in and I had to kind of figure out just exactly where do these various societies, the pre-warp drive capable societies, the warp drive capable societies, and even more importantly, or more difficultly, the trans-physical societies are being, where exactly on our beloved spiral do these various societies fit? So looking at the pre-warp drive societies, the series itself does frequently delve into issues that surround what happens when a society that is highly technologically advanced encounters one that's not nearly as advanced. And of course, it then gets into the whole issue also of do those technologically advanced societies follow a prime directive or non-interference path when dealing with the lesser technologically developed societies, or do they just go about conquest and exploitation? In the midst of this, the series depicts all manner of developmental paths that these pre-warp societies actually took. And also, on occasion, it does, they did delve into what happens when the prime directive is not strictly followed. Those tend to be some of the more interesting episodes. So let's just dive in. I'm not going to go into the various characteristics of Beige, of the spiral, but I've got them there for if you want to read them. But again, what are some of the major accomplishments that the Beige stage accomplished on Earth? Because I looked at that and I used that as a basic guide of determining, okay, what stage is that Beige or is that species? Well, interestingly enough, when I looked at the various pre-warp drive societies, I was really only able to find one that I would consider to be at the Beige stage that was actually depicted on screen in the series, and that is the Taurus 2 anthropoid that lived on the planet of Taurus 2. They were depicted as very big, very strong, possessing stone weapons and organized into small hunting bands. And this is a picture of a Taurus II anthropoid. Purple. So what was accomplished during the purple stage in human development was began to develop language, started to develop development of cultural and social coordination, and that began to really kind of spread out into onto the planet. Now, the writers didn't seem able to develop a lot of stories about species that fell into this category. I was only able to find 3 that were kind of, that I would consider as purist. There were a number of what could be considered purple societies that developed alongside another species, and that species, the more advanced species, held back the lesser advanced one. And there were also a number of species in this purple stage that were protected by some machine being and were then held back by that machine being. So, but again, I only found 3 what I would call more purist purple societies. And those were the Ventu on planet Lados, the Valians on planet Gamma Trianguli 6, and the Hanonians on Hanon 4. So pre-warp drive red, again, some of the major accomplishments of the red stage in human development was the development of agriculture, villages and towns, villages growing into towns, towns growing into cities, cities developing into empires, and further development of even more sophisticated social skills. There was really a dearth that I found, a dearth of red societies depicted in the series. And I only found one that even came close. And this was the Neurals that lived on planet Neural, or Neurals lived on the planet Neural. And they actually achieved their red status, if you will, because they were, there was a proxy war going on between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, with both of those superpowers feeding weapon technology into the 2 warring groups on the planet. It was a one episode that kind of dealt with the issue of Vietnam, the Vietnam War. So at least theoretically, you could say that it presented a view of a society that was transitioning from purple to red, even though that transition was taking place not by natural evolution, but by outside influences. Some of the blue stages, major accomplishments, development of writing, laws, money, politics, religion, and development of more sophisticated social coordination. Now, there were scores of what I would call solely blue societies depicted in the episodes of Star Trek, the original series, Star Trek Enterprise, the original series, Next Generation, and Voyager. And the storylines of these episodes approach the meeting of solely blue societies by the Federation in many different creative ways. This was probably a more fruitful developmental stages in terms of how it was depicted in the series. Just a few examples of the pre-warp drive, what I considered as blue, were the Mentakans from Mentaka 3, the Combe ethnic group member that were from a parallel Earth world, Omega 4, the Akali from the Akali homeworld, and the Nibirians from Nibiru. Oof. Orange. Again, this would be considered the beginning of the modern era on Earth, where we developed science, technology, economics. We also developed a myriad of intersubjective organizations, and this generally ushered in an era of vast material accomplishment. And most of the Star Trek series deeply explored interactions between industrial and post-industrial, which this period relatively covers in the federations. And again, these societies took on many different forms. The storylines explored many, many different themes and looked at events through a variety of values lenses. So just a few of the pre-warp drive orange. There were the Dremen of Dremen 4.
Enterprise, 2 to beam up. You must come with me.
Where are we going? To the stars?
Enterprise.
The Iosians, who were depicted on from Sigma Iosha 2, the Kalarians from Kalaris 3, and the Legonians from Legon 2. And these are just a few. I mean, I could have probably filled 3 or 4 pages of these various societies, but I just picked a few of them. Few more, from Angel 1, natives, and natives of planet 892-4. This particular society was a matriarchal dominated society. And this society was a kind of a parallel Earth society, but basically the premise of the story was what would happen if the Roman Empire didn't fall, but lasted for what would last for 2,300 years. So that gets us around to green. Some of the major accomplishments of the green stage here on Earth are universal health care in much of the industrialized world, the establishment of the United Nations and European Economic Union, and that the green stage has also really catalyzed an explosion of community service nonprofit organizations throughout the world. Now, I was only able to find what I would consider one pre-warp drive green planet or society, and that was the Edo on Rubicon 2. Now, having said that, they did not necessarily develop to that stage naturally themselves, because the planet itself was overseen by what was described as a trans-dimensional being that orbited around the planet, and that the people of the Edo actually worshipped as a god. And this is one of those episodes where kind of the ramifications and ins and outs of applying the prime directive was played out in this particular series, or this particular episode. Now, I never did really find any what I would consider to be pre-warp civilizations depicted that were what I would consider to be truly integral. So I had to kind of then look at and just kind of make the assumption that, okay, it has to be these pesky warp drive capable civilizations that possibly could be considered as being integral or second tier. Now, having said that, one would think that any society that is able to achieve warp drive or faster than light technology must be at least yellow in stage and more like turquoise or coral and beyond. And unfortunately, that's a pretty boring thing. The series writers did not make the foolish mistake of trying to write in a whole lot of very advanced, highly enlightened developmental and peacefully cooperative societies, because those storylines just wouldn't generate good ratings. So the writers really focused on developing drama, excitement, conflict, and sprinkling in a fair amount of sexual content to keep things going. What it meant then was that in the various civilizations that were warp drive capable, they also demonstrated dominant and secondary characteristics that ultimately did cover the entire spiral. So, you might have a society that could be considered as being second tier, but its predominant characteristic was lower on the spiral. So you obviously had, starting out with the Federation, which I considered to be the good guys, and that's how they're presented. Now the Federation ultimately had many planets, but there were four founder species: the humans, the Vulcans, the Tellarites, and the Andorians. And what I've got in parentheses here is, again, how would I judge which developmental stage these various species were at? Humans, I would say green, yellow; Vulcans, orange, blue; Tellarites, orange, green; Andorians, orange, purple. Some of the other good guy species that have been depicted in the series are the Bajorans, which could be very easily considered to be turquoise; the Betazoids, green, yellow for sure; the Elorians, which were predominantly depicted as Guinan, were I would consider to be either turquoise or coral. She being a very advanced being. Now there were also what I would call the not totally good nor the not totally bad species. There were the very red purple Klingons.
Sir, I protest. I am not a merry man.
There were the very obviously orange, almost pure orange Ferengi, who were kind of the supreme capitalists of the galaxy. The Telosians, which were the race depicted in the pilot of the series, who lived on Talos 5, they certainly could be considered as turquoise, but they certainly also demonstrated some characteristics that maybe made them less turquoise. And then, of course, there are the androids.
Most humanoids have the potential to be irrational. Perhaps you should attempt to access that part of your psyche.
Sir, I protest. I am not a merry...
Now, moving on to the bad guys. Probably one of the dominant or the baddest of the bads that were presented in the series were the Dominion, which is actually a race from a different quadrant. I think they were from, I believe, the Gamma Quadrant. And they are actually a race made up of, or a union made up of three different races: the Founders, or the Changeling species, the Vorta, and the Jem'Hadar. And of course, you had your classic Cardassians, which I would consider to be blue. The Romulans, which were, I classified them as blue-orange. And of course, the Borg Collective, which really is kind of a beige, red, blue.
Resistance is futile. Resistance is futile.
So, time for another trivia break. So the question is, why did Guinan, the character who was introduced in, I believe, the second season as kind of the bartender in 10 Forward in the Next Generation series, why did Guinan, who seemingly was a very, very highly advanced being, hate the Borg with such a passion? Does anybody know? Anybody want to guess?
There are some options written on the chat.
Oh, there's something on the chat?
Yeah.
What, can you read them? I can't see the chat.
Okay. Lucas said maybe they destroyed her species, and Michael says maybe their fashion choices.
Well, the first one is actually correct. in the series, around the year 2265, when Guinan was not present, her species was a victim of a major attack by the Borg. And with that, all but a handful of LRNs were either assimilated or were killed. All the LRN cities were destroyed. Besides Guinan, there actually were very few LRNs left in the galaxy. And though their numbers were small, they stood as a defiant declaration that resistance was not futile. So that now brings us to the transpersonals. And these really, I found them virtually impossible to pin down. I just couldn't do it. Logic would say that if a race or civilization reached the stage of being transphysical or non-corporeal, that they certainly must represent the stage of turquoise, coral, or beyond. I mean, if they're transphysical, that must mean they're also transpersonal and thus highly, highly advanced. Well, the series does not depict them in this way at all. Most of the transphysical beings were depicted as having the ability to switch from a non-corporeal into a corporeal form and back. And even in their non-corporeal states, these civilizations or these beings were depicted as taking on many different forms, possessing many different natures, and ultimately expressing many different values. One example of them was the companion. Some other examples are the Q continuum.
To function aboard a starship, or in any human activity, you must learn to form relationships.
It's so hard.
And of more immediate importance is your ability to work within groups.
I'm not good in groups.
To function aboard a starship.
Oh, shoot. How do I go back?
Back arrow.
Hit page up.
Just the back arrow usually works.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, from current side. There you go.
So that you had the Q continuum, you had the Dowd, which is the creature that destroyed 50 billion inhabitants of the Huznak race. The Zatarians, which were a group of beings who survived a nuclear war on their planet and did it by becoming energy beings. There were also the Wisps, which were depicted in the Star Trek Enterprise series. The Organians, which were depicted as initially in the episode as humans, but it turned out to be energy beings. There was, of course, Trelane, who was not really shown on screen as being a non-corporeal being, but he actually was. And then, of course, there was the terrifying Rejek. So, I hope I kept it to 30 minutes. So I guess I'm gonna, at this point, I'd say let's now reconvene to the holodecks so we can have some discussion and refreshments. And the two questions to discuss would be, how does looking at a society that possesses very advanced technology, yet clearly displays characteristics that are extremely pre-technological in nature, how does that change the way you think about spiral dynamics? Or just real simply, what developmental level do you think this Federation has reached? And then more importantly, why? So let's all go to the holodeck. And have some refreshments. And as long as we're there, does anybody care for any gok? There's a fresh supply that just arrived today aboard a Klingon freighter. Thank you very much.